I stared at the surgeon's blood-stained gloves and didn't see a doctor. I saw a failure. My son, Mason, was lying on a metal table, his jaw wired shut and his orbital bone shattered into 20
Listen up,
pieces
soldiers.
because I
This
taught
is our
him to
moment.
be a good man.
Stay sharp and
instead
execute
of
the
teaching
mission.
him how to be a monster. The gang leader's laugh was still echoing in the school hallway, but he didn't realize he'd just signed a death warrant written by the man who trained the world's most elite SEAL teams. Hit like, subscribe for more betrayal stories, and comment your city or country. Chapter 1. The weight of the silent, the smell of a hospital is something you never get used to. It's the smell of bleach trying
Listen
to
up,
hide
soldiers.
the scent of
This is
iron
our
and
moment.
copper.
Stay
The
sharp
smell of
and
death
execute the
losing
mission.
a fight. I sat in the plastic chair in the hallway of the ICU, my back straight, my hands resting on my knees. I wasn't moving. I hadn't moved for 6 hours. To anyone walking by, I looked like a grieving, broken father in a faded flannel shirt. But inside my head, the instructor was already performing a threat assessment. I am Logan. For 22 years, I didn't exist on paper. I lived in the shadows of Coronado, training men to jump out of planes at 30,000 feet and swim into harbors to dismantle regimes. I taught them how to breathe through the pain, how to wait for the perfect second to strike, and how to eliminate a target without leaving a fingerprint. I was the man the government called when they needed to turn boys into ghosts. But looking through that thick glass at Mason, I felt like a ghost myself. He was 17. He had his mother's kind eyes and my stubborn chin. He wanted to be an architect. He wanted to build things. And now, he was hooked up to a ventilator because 6 kids with brass knuckles and a sense of entitlement decided his sneakers were worth more than his life. Mr. Logan? I didn't turn my head. I recognized the voice. It was Principal Evan. He was a soft-featured man who spent his days worrying about school budgets and peanut allergies. He sat down next to me, smelling of stale coffee and anxiety. "The police are taking statements, Logan," Evan whispered, his voice shaking. "But you have to understand. These boys, especially Hunter, his father is on the city council. They're saying it was a mutual fight. They're saying Mason threw the first punch." I finally turned my eyes toward him. I didn't blink. I've stared down some of the most dangerous insurgents on the planet, and Evan wilted under my gaze in 3 seconds. "A mutual fight?" I asked. My voice was low, like the growl of a distant engine. "My son has a collapsed lung and a grade 3 brain bleed. The boy who did this, Hunter, did he even have a scratch on him?" Evan looked at his shoes. "He has a bruised knuckle. He's claiming self-defense. The school cameras, they were undergoing maintenance in that specific alleyway. I'm sorry. I really am." I stood up. I didn't feel anger. Anger is a luxury for people who don't know how to handle business. I felt a cold, familiar clarity. It was the same feeling I had before a night drop into a hot zone. It was the feeling of a mission beginning. "Go home, Evan," I said quietly. "Logan, please, don't do anything rash. Let the system work," he pleaded. I didn't answer. I walked toward the ICU doors. I needed to see Mason one more time before the father went to sleep and the instructor took over. When I entered the room, the only sound was the rhythmic hiss of the machine breathing for my son. I took his hand. It was cold. I looked at the bruises on his face, the specific pattern of the impact. I've seen thousands of injuries in my career. I knew exactly how these were delivered. This wasn't a schoolyard scrap. They had held him down while one person used him as a heavy bag. "I'm sorry, Mason," I whispered. "I told you that the world would be fair if you were a good person. I lied. The world only respects what it fears." I kissed his forehead and walked out. I didn't go to my car. I went to the school. The sun was setting, casting long, bloody shadows across the parking lot. I saw them immediately. A group of 5 teenagers leaning against a black SUV. They were laughing. In the center was Hunter. He was tall, wearing a varsity jacket, tossing a vape pen into the air and catching it. He was the king of this small, pathetic hill. I walked toward them, my footsteps silent on the pavement. I wasn't running. I wasn't shouting. I was just coming. One of the boys, a kid named Julian, saw me first. He nudged Hunter. The laughter died down, replaced by a smug, arrogant silence. Hunter stepped forward, crossing his arms. "Hey, look, it's the janitor," Hunter sneered. "Or are you the guy who mows the lawn? You look lost, old man." I stopped exactly 6 feet away. The reactionary gap. If he moved, I'd have him in less than half a second. But I wasn't here to break his neck. Not yet. "My son is in a coma, Hunter," I said. No emotion, just a statement of fact. Hunter laughed. He actually laughed. He looked at his friends, then back at me. "Maybe your son should have learned how to take a hit. He cried like a little girl, you know? Please stop, please stop." It was honestly embarrassing. If I were you, I'd be ashamed to call that my kid. The boys behind him chuckled. Hunter stepped closer, his chest out. "Now, get out of my face before you end up in the bed next to him. My dad owns this town. You're nobody." I looked into his eyes. I didn't see a monster. I saw a child playing with fire who had no idea he was standing in a room full of gasoline. I saw the arrogance of a boy who had never met a man who didn't care about his father's money or his city council seat. "You think you're a predator, Hunter," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "But you've only ever hunted sheep. You have no idea what it's like to encounter something that hunts the things that scare you." Hunter's smile flickered for a second. There was something in my tone, something cold and ancient, that made his pupils dilate. But his ego was too big to listen to his instincts. "Whatever, Gramps," he spat, turning his back on me. "Let's go, guys. This place smells like poverty." He climbed into his SUV and roared out of the parking lot, intentionally splashing a puddle toward my boots. I didn't move. I watched the taillights disappear. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and dialed a number I hadn't called in 3 years. It was an encrypted line, routed through a server in Zurich. "This is Instructor Zero," I said when the line picked up. There was a heavy silence on the other end. Then, a deep, raspy voice replied. "Boss, we thought you were dead. Where are you?" "I'm in a place that needs a lesson in structural demolition," I said, looking up at the school's front doors. "I need Blake, Victor, and Grant. Tell them the master class is back in session. And tell them to bring the heavy digital suite. We aren't just going after a gang. We're going after a bloodline. Consider it done, boss. We're wheels up in 20 minutes. I hung up the phone. I looked at my hands. They were steady. For the last few years, I had tried to be Logan, the quiet neighbor who fixed his own porch and paid his taxes on time. I tried to bury the man who knew 40 ways to kill a person with a ballpoint pen. But as I walked back to my truck, I felt the old skin tightening. The world had taken Mason's voice, so I was going to give them mine. And my voice sounds like thunder. The next morning, the sun rose over the city with a mocking brightness. I hadn't slept a single second. I spent the entire night in my garage, sitting on a wooden stool, cleaning a set of specialized surveillance lenses that hadn't seen the light of day since my final op in the Middle East. My hands moved with a muscle memory that felt like a curse. Every click of a spring, every wipe of a cloth, was a silent prayer for the son who was currently fighting for his life 3 miles away. Around 8 a.m., I pulled my truck back into the school parking lot. I didn't want to be here, but in the military, you never engage an enemy until you've mapped the terrain. I needed to see how deep the rot went and who was holding the shovel. As I walked toward the main office, I saw them. The Wolf Pack. That's what the local kids called Hunter's Gang. They were huddled near the trophy cases, leaning against the glass with a sense of ownership that made my skin crawl. Hunter was in the center, sporting a fresh bandage on his hand like a badge of honor. He was holding court, laughing as he reenacted a punch for his friends. I stopped at the office window. "I'm here to see the principal," I told the secretary, a woman named Daphne. She looked at me with a mix of pity and genuine fear. "He's in a meeting, Mr. Logan," she whispered, her eyes darting toward the hallway where Hunter stood. "Maybe you should come back later. Or maybe you should just let the police handle it. For your own safety. The police are currently being told what to do by Hunter's father. I said, my voice flat and cold. I'll wait. I turned around and leaned against the counter. I wasn't hiding. I was baiting. In the field, we call this drawing fire, to see where the snipers are hiding. Hunter noticed me almost immediately. He whispered something to his friends, and they started walking over in a staggered formation, amateur but aggressive. Hunter stopped 2 feet from me, smelling of expensive cologne and cheap bravado. He looked me up and down, a smug grin plastered on his face. "Still here, old man?" Hunter asked. He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a hiss. "I heard Mason woke up for a second last night. He started crying as soon as he saw the light. Guess we broke more than just his nose. We broke his spirit. He's a coward, just like you." The instructor inside me analyzed his stance. He was leaning on his right leg, chin exposed, hands in his pockets. I could have ended his life in 3 different ways before his heart beat again. But that would be too fast. He needed to understand the scale of his mistake first. Revenge is a dish best served with tactical precision. "You're laughing, Hunter," I said, my voice so calm it seemed to rattle him more than a shout would have. "That's interesting. I've spent 20 years watching men laugh like you. Usually, they're the ones who break first when the lights go out." Hunter's eyes narrowed. He didn't like the fact that I wasn't flinching. He stepped even closer, trying to use his height to intimidate me. "You think you're tough because you have some gray hair? My dad has the chief of police on speed dial. 1 word from me, and you're in a cell for harassing minors. So why don't you go back to the hospital and pick out a nice casket for your loser son?" One of his friends, a stocky kid named Colin, let out a loud, mocking bark of a laugh. "Yeah, maybe he can get a discount if he buys 2. 1 for him and 1 for his kid." I felt the heat rising in my chest, a roar of fire that wanted to tear through my skin, but I pushed it down into a cold, dark place. I looked past Hunter, straight at the principal's office door. It was cracked open. Principal Evan was watching from the shadows, his face pale. He was terrified of these children because of who their parents were. The system wasn't broken. It was built to protect people like Hunter. "I'm not here to fight you, Hunter," I said. "I'm here to give you a chance. Go to the police. Tell the truth. Tell them you jumped him 5-1 while he was walking to his car. Do it now, and maybe the fallout won't bury you." Hunter threw his head back and laughed. It was a loud, ugly sound that echoed through the quiet hallway. "A chance? You're giving me a chance? Look at you. You're a nobody in a thrift store jacket. You're a ghost, Logan. And ghosts don't give orders to kings." He turned to his crew, his voice booming so the other students could hear. "Did you hear that? The janitor is threatening me. I'm so scared I might just go trip over Mason's feeding tube on my way out." They all laughed. It was the sound of pure, unadulterated entitlement. They felt invincible. They had the school, the police, and the town in their pockets. They thought the world was a playground built specifically for them. Just then, the office door fully opened. Evan stepped out, looking like he wanted to vanish into the floorboards. "Hunter, get to class. Now." Hunter didn't even look at the principal. He kept his eyes on mine. He reached out and tapped my chest with 2 fingers, a gesture of pure disrespect. "See you around, Pops. Tell Mason I'll send him some flowers, if he lives long enough to smell them." He swaggered away, his group following him like a tail on a dog. They were bumping shoulders, high-fiving, celebrating the fact that they had bullied a grieving father in public. Evan walked over to me, his hands shaking as he adjusted his glasses. "Logan, I told you. You're making it worse. Hunter's father, Victor, he's already called the school board. They're looking for any reason to ban you from the property. Please, for your own sake, go home." I looked at Evan. I didn't see a villain, just a coward. And in my experience, cowards are the ones who let evil grow until it becomes a monster. "You're right, Evan," I said, stepping toward the exit. "I should go home. I have a lot of work to do." "You're giving up?" Evan asked, a hint of relief in his voice. I stopped at the glass doors and looked back at the trophy case where the wolf pack had just been standing. In my line of work, we don't call it giving up. We call it clearing the kill zone. You should tell your staff to stay late tonight, Evan. The weather is about to change. I walked out into the cool air. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text message from an unknown, encrypted number appeared. It was 3 words, Team IS on site. I headed toward a small, nondescript motel on the edge of town. As I pulled into the lot, I saw a black rental SUV with tinted windows. Standing by the door was a man I hadn't seen since a rooftop in Damascus. Blake was tall, lean, and looked like a high-end corporate lawyer, but I'd seen him clear a room of 6 armed men with nothing but a tactical pen. Behind him, the door opened, and Victor and Grant stepped out. Victor was the tech genius, a man who could hack a satellite while taking a nap. Grant was the muscle, a former ranger who moved with the grace of a panther. Instructor, Blake said, snapping a sharp, crisp nod. No hugs, no emotional reunions. Just the professional acknowledgement of a commander. Report, I said. We've mapped the local network, Victor said, holding up a ruggedized tablet. The town's police servers are a joke. I've already found the deleted footage from the school's alleyway. Hunter didn't just jump your son, boss. He recorded it on his phone. He's been sharing it on a private cloud server with his friends. They're treating it like a highlight reel. I felt a sharp spike of ice in my veins. He recorded it? Yeah, Victor said, his face darkening. It's bad. But here's the kicker. The local sergeant, a guy named Kyle, was the one who told them how to delete the school footage. We have the logs. I looked at my team. They weren't just soldiers. They were the best of the best. And they were here for me because I was the one who taught them how to survive when everyone else wanted them dead. We aren't going to the police, I said. And we aren't going to the press. We're going to dismantle them from the inside out. I want their finances, their reputations, and their sense of security gone by the end of the week. But first, I want to show Hunter what happens when you laugh at the wrong man. What's the move, boss? Grant asked, cracking his knuckles. I looked toward the school, where the wolf pack was currently sitting in class, thinking they were the kings of the world. Tonight, I said, we start the psychological phase. I want them to feel like they're being watched by something they can't see. I want them to realize that the janitor they mocked has friends they can't even imagine. Let's show them what a real predator looks like. The motel room smelled of gun oil and high-end electronics. Victor had 3 laptops open, his fingers dancing across the keys. On the main screen, a digital map of our town, Oakhaven, was glowing with red dots. Each dot represented a member of the wolf pack and their parents. Boss, you need to see this, Victor said, his voice dropping an octave. He pulled up a grainy, shaky video file. I stood behind him, my heart turning into a block of lead. It was the footage Hunter had recorded. I watched my son, Mason, backed into a corner by 5 of them. He didn't plead for his life. He just held his hands up, trying to de-escalate. Then Hunter stepped forward with a pair of brass knuckles and landed the first blow. The rest of the video was a blur of violence and laughter. But the most sickening part came at the end. A police cruiser pulled into the frame. A man stepped out, Sergeant Kyle. He didn't pull his weapon. He didn't make arrests. He patted Hunter on the shoulder, took the phone, and pointed toward the school's security camera. He coached them, I whispered. My hands were shaking, not with fear, but with a primal rage I hadn't felt in decades. He watched my son bleed out and coached the attackers on how to hide the evidence. It gets worse, Blake added, leaning against the doorframe. I followed the money. Sergeant Kyle's mortgage was paid off last month by a shell company owned by Hunter's father, Victor. This isn't just a neighborhood bullying case, Logan. This is a protected criminal enterprise. The police aren't coming to help us. They're the ones keeping the gate closed. I looked at the screen. I saw Sergeant Kyle's face, a man who had sworn an oath to protect the innocent. He had sold my son's life for a cleared mortgage. If we go to the station with this, Grant said, the evidence will vanish before we reach the front desk. Kyle has back doors into every server in this precinct. He'll wipe it and put us in a cell for hacking government property. I know, I said. I walked over to a heavy duffel bag I had brought from my basement. I unzipped it. It wasn't filled with rifles. It was filled with small, black boxes, encrypted signal jammers, and high-gain microphones. If the system won't provide justice, I continued, we will create our own. Grant, I want you to tail Sergeant Kyle. I want to know every person he talks to, every bribe he takes, and every drink he pours. Blake, find out where Hunter's father keeps his off-book ledgers. If he's buying cops, he's doing it with dirty money. And what about the kids? Victor asked. The kids are the symptoms, I replied. The parents and the cops are the disease. But symptoms still need to be managed. Tonight, Hunter is having a party at his father's lake house. No adults. Just the wolf pack celebrating their victory over my son. I looked at my reflection in the darkened window. I looked like a tired father, but my eyes belonged to a man who had hunted high-value targets in the mountains of Tora Bora. We're going to give them a night they'll never forget, I said. Victor, I want you to hijack the house's smart system. When I give the word, I want the lights, the locks, and the sound under our control. No one leaves. No one calls out. You want to hurt them? Grant asked, his hand drifting toward his sidearm. No, I said firmly. I want to terrify them. I want them to feel the walls closing in. I want them to understand that their invincibility was a lie. Physical pain heals, Grant. But the fear of a shadow that can take everything from you, that stays forever. I left the motel and drove to the hospital. I sat by Mason's bed for 20 minutes. I didn't say a word. I just listened to the hiss of the ventilator. Every breath he took was a reminder of why I was doing this. As I walked out of the hospital, I saw Sergeant Kyle sitting in his cruiser in the parking lot. He was eating a burger, looking perfectly content. He saw me and smirked, tapping his badge through the window as if to remind me who ran this town. I didn't stop. I didn't glare. I just kept walking to my truck. He thought he was the hunter. He thought I was just another victim's father he could intimidate into silence. I climbed into my truck and adjusted the rearview mirror. I saw Kyle pull out behind me, following me at a distance. He wanted to make sure I went home. He wanted to keep me under his thumb. I tapped my earpiece. Victor, are you live? Loud and clear, boss. I'm inside the sergeant's dash cam and his personal phone. Good, I said, making a slow turn onto the road leading toward the lake. Let's start the music. Send the first file to his car's infotainment system. A few seconds later, I saw Kyle's cruiser swerve slightly. Through my mirror, I could see him frantically stabbing at his dashboard. I knew what he was seeing. It was the deleted footage of the beating, the footage he thought he had destroyed, playing on a loop on his own police screen. Beneath the video, a single line of text appeared in bright red. The instructor is watching. I saw his brake lights slam on. He stopped in the middle of the road, staring at the screen in horror. He looked around, eyes wide, searching the trees, searching the shadows. He realized for the first time that he wasn't the one doing the surveillance anymore. I didn't slow down. I drove toward the lake house. The sun was going down, and the wolf pack was getting ready to party. They thought they were safe in their fortress of wealth and corruption. They had no idea that the gates were already open, and the ghosts were already inside. The lake house was a sprawling glass and steel monstrosity tucked away behind a wall of ancient oaks. To anyone else, it was a symbol of wealth. To me, it was a tactical nightmare with too many points of entry and zero situational awareness. I sat in the darkness of my truck, parked a quarter-mile down the service road, watching the flickering neon lights through the trees. I could hear the bass from the speakers thumping, a rhythmic heartbeat for a house full of kids who thought the world owed them everything. Grant, report, I whispered into the comms. I'm in position at the north tree line. Grant's voice came through, crisp and cold. I've got eyes on the patio. Hunter is there. He's holding a red cup, bragging to a girl. Looks like Lila's niece, Harper. He's showing her something on his phone. Likely the video of Mason. My jaw tightened so hard I thought my teeth might crack. And the others? All present. Colin, Julian, and the rest of the pack. They've got 2 lookouts at the gate, but they're more interested in their cigarettes than the perimeter. These kids wouldn't notice a tank rolling up the driveway. Don't underestimate them, I cautioned. Arrogance is their armor, but fear is our weapon. Victor, what's the digital status? I'm in their pockets, boss, Victor replied. I've cloned every phone in that house. I'm currently watching their group chat. They're joking about Mason's nap in the hospital. Hunter just sent a text saying, the old man came to school today to beg for mercy. I told him to go buy a coffin. I closed my eyes for a second, picturing Mason's face under those hospital lights. My son wasn't a soldier. He didn't sign up for this. But I did. And by extension, these boys had just stepped onto my battlefield. It's time to start the shadow phase, I said. Grant, move in. I want the lookouts neutralized. No injuries, just plastic restraints and a heavy dose of reality. Blake, start the sweep on the father's office in the basement. I want those ledgers. I stepped out of my truck, my movements fluid and silent. I didn't wear a mask. I didn't need one. I wanted them to know exactly who was coming for them. I moved through the woods, the damp leaves muting my footsteps. This was the part of the job I was best at, the silent approach. In the SEAL teams, we called it becoming the woods. I reached the edge of the manicured lawn. The party was in full swing. About 20 teenagers were scattered around the pool and the outdoor kitchen. I watched Hunter. He was the son they all orbited. He felt powerful because he had a name and a bank account. But out here in the dark, those things were just noise. Boss, I've got the sergeant, Grant's voice whispered in my ear. Kyle is on his way. He's panicked. He just pulled into the driveway. He's not here for a drink. He's here to warn the kid. Let him in, I said. I want the rat and the wolf in the same cage. I watched as Sergeant Kyle's personal truck sped up the drive. He hopped out, his uniform disheveled, and sprinted toward Hunter. The music didn't stop, but the vibe changed instantly. Hunter looked confused, then annoyed as the sergeant grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the glass doors of the house. Victor, kill the music, I ordered, and dropped the cellular curtain. Now, 1 second, the air was filled with high-energy pop. The next, a deafening, unnatural silence fell over the lake. I saw the kids on the patio freezing, looking at their phones. My signal's gone. I heard one girl cry out. Mine too. What the hell? Inside the glass house, I could see Kyle and Hunter arguing. Kyle was pointing toward the woods, exactly where I was standing, but he couldn't see me. I was a shadow among shadows. Blake, status? I asked. I'm in the basement office, Logan. You were right. Victor's father isn't just a councilman. He's a middleman for a construction cartel. I've got names, dates, and amounts. This goes all the way to the governor's office. This isn't just a bullying case anymore. It's a RICO suit waiting to happen. Copy that. Secure the data and egress. Grant, take the power. A heartbeat later, the entire estate plunged into total darkness. The expensive landscape lighting, the pool glow, the house lights, everything died. The teenagers started screaming, the sound of genuine, primal fear echoing off the water. I stepped out from behind a massive oak tree and walked onto the stone patio. I didn't run. I walked with the steady, predatory gait of a man who owned the night. In my hand, I held a high-intensity tactical strobe light. I clicked it on. The white light pulsed at a frequency designed to disorient the human brain. The kids on the patio stumbled, covering their eyes, gasping in confusion. Through the strobing flashes, I looked like a ghost appearing and disappearing, getting closer with every pulse. I reached the center of the patio. The teenagers scrambled away from me, tripping over lounge chairs. I didn't look at them. I looked through the glass doors at Sergeant Kyle and Hunter. They were staring out, their faces illuminated by the frantic white flashes. Kyle reached for his sidearm. Don't do it, Kyle, I said, my voice projected through a small loudspeaker on my vest. It sounded like the voice of a god coming from the darkness itself. Victor has your body cam live streaming to a cloud server. If you draw that weapon, the whole world sees you execute an unarmed civilian. Kyle's hand froze on his holster. He looked at the camera lens on his chest, then back at me. He was sweating, his eyes darting around the dark room. "Logan," he yelled through the glass. "You're insane. You're going to prison for this." "I've been to worse places than prison, Sergeant," I replied. I walked up to the glass door. Hunter was standing behind Kyle, his bravado completely gone. He looked like a little boy who had realized the monster under his bed was real and it had just crawled out. I tapped on the glass with my knuckles, the same way I had tapped on Mason's ICU window. "The scouting is over," I said, my voice low and cold. "Tomorrow, the lesson begins. Sleep well, Hunter. It's the last time you'll feel safe in this town." I turned around and walked back into the woods. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel their fear vibrating in the air behind me. "All units, extract," I commanded. "We have the intel. We have the leverage. Now, we prepare the final exam." As I reached my truck, my phone buzzed. It was a picture from the hospital. Mason's hand was gripping the bedsheet. He was fighting. "Keep fighting, son," I whispered to the empty cabin. "The instructor is just getting started." The darkness of the lake house was still ringing in their ears when I returned to the motel. We didn't celebrate. In my world, a successful infiltration is just a prerequisite for the real work. I sat at the small round table, staring at a map of the county, while Victor processed the data Blake had pulled from the councilman's basement. "Boss, you need to see the psychological profile on these kids," Victor said, turning a monitor toward me. "Hunter is the alpha, but Julian, he's the weak link. He's the one who stayed back in the video. He looked sick while it was happening. He's been searching how to confess to a crime anonymously on his laptop for the last 3 hours. Target him," I said. "Not with force, with presence." The next night, the air was thick with the scent of coming rain. Julian lived in a suburban neighborhood that screamed middle-class security. I waited in the shadows of his kitchen, sitting in a chair I'd moved into the corner of the room. I hadn't broken in. I'd bypassed his keypad in 6 seconds. At 11:30 p.m., the back door creaked open. Julian walked in, his head down, scrolling through his phone. He walked straight to the fridge, grabbed a soda, and turned around. He froze. The bottle slipped from his hand, shattering on the tile. "Don't scream, Julian," I said softly. I didn't move. I kept my hands visible on the table. "If I wanted to hurt you, you wouldn't have made it past the driveway." The boy was trembling so hard his teeth were literally chattering. Who are you? How did you get in here?" "I'm Mason's father," I said. "And I'm the man who's going to decide if you spend the next 10 years in a juvenile detention center or if you get to have a life." Julian sank onto a kitchen stool, his face ghostly white. "It was Hunter's idea. He said Mason was acting stuck up. We didn't mean to. I didn't think he'd get hurt that bad." "You didn't think?" I stood up slowly. I walked over to him, stopping just inside his personal space. I was a foot taller and a lifetime harder. "You held his arms, Julian. I saw the video. You held him while Hunter used his ribs for target practice. Tell me, did you think about Mason's mother when you heard his bones snap?" Julian started to sob, ugly, terrified gasps. "I'm sorry. Please. Hunter said his dad would take care of us. He said the cops were on our side. Hunter's dad is currently under investigation by people much more powerful than a city councilman." I lied, though with the files Blake had, it would be true by morning. "And Sergeant Kyle? He's currently wondering which one of you is going to snitch first to save your own skin." I leaned in, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried the weight of a death sentence. "The wolf pack is dead, Julian. You're just a bunch of scared children who followed a bully off a cliff. Now, you have one chance. I want a written statement. I want the names of everyone involved, the location of the brass knuckles Hunter used, and I want it delivered to the hospital front desk by 8 a.m. "Hunter will kill me," Julian whimpered. "Hunter is a child who plays with shadows," I said. I am the shadow. If you do this, I'll make sure you're protected. If you don't, well, I've spent my life hunting people much more dangerous than a 17-year-old with a varsity jacket. I walked toward the door, stopping with my hand on the frame. Mason is breathing through a tube because of you. Remember that when you try to sleep tonight. I vanished into the night before he could even look up. But I didn't go back to the motel. I had a second stop to make. I drove to a small, quiet house on the north side of town. The lights were on. This was the home of Lila, my ex-wife. We hadn't spoken in 2 years, not since the divorce papers were finalized. She was the one Mason lived with. She was the one who was supposed to be watching him. I knocked on the door. When she opened it, her eyes were red and swollen. She looked like she had aged a decade in the last 3 days. "Logan," she breathed, her voice cracking. "The police, they said you were causing trouble at the school. They told me to call them if you showed up here." I stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. The house was exactly as I remembered it, but there was a tension in the air that felt like a coiled spring. "The police are protecting the boys who hurt our son, Lila," I said, turning to face her. "Why aren't you screaming for justice? Why are you sitting here in the dark?" Lila looked away, her hands twisting her sweater. "You don't understand, Logan. Victor, Hunter's father, he has influence. He told me if I made a scene, he'd find a way to take my house. He said he'd make sure Mason never got into a good college." I felt a cold chill run down my spine. This wasn't just bullying. This was systematic extortion. "Is that all?" I asked, stepping closer. "Because you're not a coward, Lila. You're a mother. There's something else." She broke then, collapsing onto the sofa. "He has photos, Logan. From that mistake I made 3 years ago. The one that ended our marriage. He said if I pushed for charges, he'd post them everywhere. Mason would see them. The whole town would see them. I couldn't. I didn't know what to do. I stood there, looking at the woman I had once loved. The betrayal stung, but the realization of what Victor had done was far worse. He had used her shame to silence the only person who should have been Mason's loudest advocate. "He used our son's life to blackmail you?" I asked, my voice terrifyingly quiet. Lila nodded, her face buried in her hands. "I'm so sorry, Logan. I was trying to protect him." "No," I said, my instructor persona merging with the father. "You were trying to protect yourself. But it doesn't matter now." I pulled out my phone and dialed Victor. "Delete the cloud server," I told my tech specialist. "And Blake, I want Councilman Victor's personal life dismantled. I want him to lose everything. His house, his reputation, and his freedom. But leave the kid to me." I looked at Lila. "Go to the hospital. Stay with Mason. Don't worry about the photos. By tomorrow morning, the only person people will be talking about is the man who thought he could buy his way out of a crime." I walked out of the house, the rain finally beginning to fall. The emotional layers of this case were deeper than I'd thought. This wasn't just about a street gang jumping my son. It was about a father using his power to crush everyone in his path. But he'd made one fatal mistake. He had picked a fight with a man who had nothing left to lose but a son who was already in a coma. "Grant, Victor, Blake," I said into the comms as I started my truck. "Phase 6 is a go. We aren't scouting anymore. We're going to war." The rain hammered against the windshield of my truck like 1,000 tiny hammers, but the storm inside my chest was far more violent. Knowing that Lila had been silenced by blackmail transformed my rage into something colder, more tactical. This wasn't just a neighborhood scuffle anymore. It was a siege. Victor, the high and mighty councilman, wasn't just a father protecting a wayward son, illegally or otherwise. He was a predator who preyed on the vulnerable to keep his own bloodline atop the food chain. "Boss, I've got the bypass on Lila's digital records." Victor's voice crackled through my earpiece, pulling me back from the edge. I found the server where the councilman was holding those photos. It wasn't even encrypted. The man is arrogant, Logan. He didn't think anyone would ever look. "Is it gone?" I asked, my knuckles white against the steering wheel. "Not just gone. I've replaced every image with a high-resolution copy of his own offshore bank statements, and the video of the beating. If he tries to open that file to blackmail her again, he'll be looking at his own arrest warrant. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. Good. What about the boy, Julian? He's at the hospital, Grant chimed in. I'm watching him from the cafeteria. He looks like he's about to jump out of his skin. He just handed a thick envelope to the nurse at the station and bolted for the exit. He's terrified, boss. He's currently sitting in his car in the parking lot, throwing up. Let him go, I said. He's served his purpose. That envelope contains the nail for Hunter's coffin. Now, we move on the head of the snake. I drove toward the gated community where Councilman Victor lived. It was a fortress of privilege. High stone walls, manicured hedges, and a sense of security that was entirely artificial. To a man like Victor, these walls kept the world out. To a man like me, they just contained the target. I met Blake and Grant at a rally point 2 blocks away. They were dressed in dark, nondescript tactical gear. No insignias, no names. Just shadows. The councilman is hosting a private dinner tonight, Blake reported, checking the slide on his suppressed sidearm. The chief of police is there. 2 other board members. They're likely discussing how to make the Mason-Logan problem disappear permanently. They think they're having a meeting, I said, checking my own gear. But they're actually attending a funeral for their careers. Blake, you take the back service entrance. Grant, you're with me. We're going through the front door. I want them to see us coming. What about the legalities, Logan? Grant asked, his voice steady. We go in there like this, and we're the ones on the news tomorrow. I looked at him. In the teams, we were taught that sometimes you have to break a window to save a life. Tonight, we're breaking the whole house. Victor has the footage, the bank logs, and the confession. By the time the sun comes up, the legality will be on our side because we're delivering the evidence directly to the one person Victor can't buy. Who's that? The Federal Bureau, I said. Victor's tech is already routing everything to the regional office in the city. We just have to make sure the targets stay in the room until the cavalry arrives. We moved with a synchronized silence that only comes from years of operating in the dark. We bypassed the gate sensors and moved across the lawn. The house was glowing with warmth and light, the sounds of clinking glasses and laughter drifting through the rain. It was nauseating. My son was breathing through a machine, and these men were toasted to their own cleverness. I signaled Grant. He cut the main fiber line to the house, plunging the smart locks into a fail-secure mode. Then, I stepped onto the porch and kicked the front door. The heavy oak frame gave way with a splintering crash. The laughter inside stopped instantly. I walked into the grand foyer, the water dripping off my jacket, my face a mask of cold, professional intent. In the dining room, 6 men sat around a mahogany table. Councilman Victor was at the head, a glass of expensive scotch in his hand. He looked up, his face shifting from shock to a sneer and a heartbeat. Logan, he barked, standing up. You've lost your mind. You just committed a felony. Chief, arrest this man. The chief of police, a man with a bloated face and a badge that looked like it was bought at a pawn shop, started to reach for his belt. Don't, I said. The word wasn't a shout. It was a command. Grant stepped in behind me, his weapon held at a low ready. The chief froze. Sit down, Victor, I said, walking toward the table. I pulled out a small tablet and slid it across the mahogany surface. I'm not here to kill you. I'm here to show you your future. Victor looked at the screen. His eyes widened as he saw his offshore accounts, the blackmail files, and finally, the confession Julian had just signed. This is all illegally obtained, Victor hissed, though his hand was shaking. It'll never hold up in court. I'll have your head for this. Maybe, I said, leaning over the table until I was inches from his face. But while your lawyers are fighting over the evidence, the news is already running the story. Victor, I didn't just hack your files. I sent them to every news outlet in the state 5 minutes ago. Your influence just evaporated. The chief's phone began to buzz. Then the other board members' phones. One by one, they looked at their screens, their faces turning the color of ash. You're a dead man, Logan, Victor whispered. I've been dead for a long time, I replied. But you? You're just beginning to realize what it's like to lose everything. Your house, your money, and your son. Speaking of Hunter, he's currently being picked up by a different squad. Not the local police. The state troopers. I turned to the chief. And you? You might want to start thinking about which cell block you'll be comfortable in. I hear the inmates have a special way of welcoming former cops. Outside, the faint wail of sirens began to cut through the sound of the rain. Not one or two. A dozen. I looked at the men around the table. They weren't powerful anymore. They were just scared, middle-aged men caught in a trap they didn't see coming. I felt a pang of hollowness. This wasn't the quiet revenge I had planned. It was loud. It was messy. But it was necessary. Grant, let's go, I said. Our job here is done. As we walked out into the rain, the blue and red lights were already reflecting off the puddles in the driveway. I didn't stay to watch the handcuffs go on. I had one more place to be. I drove back to the hospital. The hallways were quiet, the fluorescent lights humming. I walked into Mason's room. Lila was there, sitting by his side. She looked up at me, her eyes searching mine. Is it over? She whispered. It's starting to be, I said. I sat down on the other side of the bed and took Mason's hand. For the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe. But as I looked at my son, I saw his eyelids flutter. Logan, Lila gasped. Look. Mason's hand gave a tiny, weak squeeze against mine. It wasn't much, but it was everything. But then, the heart monitor began to beep, a frantic, uneven rhythm. Nurses came rushing in, pushing us back. What's happening? I shouted. He's crashing, a nurse yelled. Get the crash cart. Now. I stood in the hallway, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had dismantled a criminal empire, but none of it mattered if I couldn't save the one thing that actually counted. The hospital hallway became a blurred tunnel of white light and shouting voices. I was pushed back by a wall of blue scrubs as the crash cart rattled past me. The sound of the defibrillator charging, that high-pitched, whining hum, felt like a drill pressing into my skull. I had fought through insurgent ambushes and survived sub-zero extractions, but standing behind that glass, watching my son's chest heave under the force of a medic's compressions, I was paralyzed. Lila was screaming, her hands over her mouth. I reached out, grabbing her shoulders, pulling her into my chest. Not because I was strong, but because if I didn't hold on to something, I was going to collapse. Clear, the doctor shouted. Mason's body jolted. The line on the monitor stayed flat. Again, increased to 200. Clear, another jolt. Silence. Then, a slow, agonizingly thin beep, beep, beep. We have a rhythm, a nurse exhaled. He's stabilized, but it's fragile. We need to move him to surgery. The internal pressure is spiking. They wheeled him out of the room in a frantic sprint. I watched the doors swing shut, and for the first time in my life, I felt the instructor break. I walked to the end of the hallway and punched the concrete wall. My knuckles split, the physical pain a welcome distraction from the hollowness in my gut. My phone vibrated. It was Blake. Boss, the feds have Victor and the chief in custody. The news is blowing up. But we have a problem. Hunter didn't get picked up. He slipped out the back of the lake house before the state troopers arrived. He's gone dark. I wiped the blood from my hand onto my jeans. My eyes went cold. How? He had a burner phone we didn't track. Someone tipped him off. Probably a deputy loyal to the chief. We're tracking his father's black SUV, but he's smart enough to ditch it. He's not smart, Blake, I spat. He's desperate. And a desperate animal goes to the one place it feels safe. The school? Blake asked. No. He knows I'll look there. He's going to his grandfather's hunting cabin in the North Ridge. It's off the grid, stocked with supplies, and Victor told me about it during the negotiation at the house, unintentionally. You want us to intercept? No, I said, walking toward the hospital exit. This isn't a tactical extraction anymore. This is a personal debt. Stay with the feds. Make sure the evidence against the councilman stays leak-proof. I'm going to find the boy. Logan, wait. Lila called out from the waiting room. She saw the look in my eyes, the look of a man who was no longer a father, but a weapon. Don't do this. Let the police find him. Mason needs you here. Mason needs to wake up in a world where the person who did this to him can't ever hurt him again, I said. If I let the system handle Hunter, he'll be out on bail in 48 hours because of his grandfather's lawyers. That's not justice. That's a pause button. I drove toward North Ridge. The rain had turned into a thick, suffocating fog. The mountain road was a series of treacherous switchbacks, but I didn't slow down. I was driving with a singular, terrifying focus. Hunter thought he was a hunter because he wore a varsity jacket and ran a school hallway. He had no idea what it was like to be pursued by a man who had spent his life tracking high-value targets through the Hindu Kush. I reached the trailhead an hour later. The black SUV was there, abandoned in a ditch, its tires spinning in the mud. He had panicked. He had crashed. I stepped out of my truck, pulling a heavy-duty flashlight and a pair of restraints from my kit. I didn't carry a gun. I didn't need one. I followed the tracks through the mud. They were heavy, frantic, and uneven. He was running blindly. I moved through the brush, my breathing steady, my heart rate hovering at a professional 60 beats per minute. I was the ghost in the machine. I heard him before I saw him. The sound of branches snapping and a terrified, sobbing breath. He was huddled under a rock overhang, shivering in the cold rain. I clicked on my light. The beam hit him square in the face. Hunter shrieked, scrambling backward, hitting his head against the stone. "Get away from me," he screamed. "My dad will kill you. I'll tell everyone you attacked me." I walked toward him, the light never wavering from his eyes. "Your dad is in a federal holding cell, Hunter. Your friends have signed confessions. And the wolf pack is currently being dismantled piece by piece." I stopped 3 feet from him. He looked pathetic. The king of Oakhaven was wet, smelling of mud and fear, clutching a heavy stick like it was a sword. "I didn't mean to do it," he wailed. "It was a joke. We were just having fun." "A joke?" I asked, my voice echoing off the rocks. "My son's heart stopped tonight, Hunter. Is that part of the punchline?" I stepped into the light. I didn't strike him. I didn't even raise my voice. I just looked at him with the same clinical coldness I used when evaluating a failing recruit. "You're going to walk down this mountain," I said. "You're going to walk into that police station, and you're going to tell them exactly what you did. Not because you're sorry, but because you realize that if you don't, I will be the one waiting for you every time the lights go out. Every time you turn a corner. Every time you close your eyes." I leaned in, my shadow swallowing him whole. "I am the man who trains the people you see in movies, Hunter. I am the nightmare that keeps the bad guys awake. And from this second on, I am your shadow." The boy collapsed into the mud, his spirit finally, completely broken. He didn't fight. He didn't argue. He just sobbed. I grabbed him by the collar and hauled him up. "Walk." As we descended the mountain, I saw the lights of the city below. The war was ending. The tactical phase was over. Now, only the healing remained. The walk down the mountain was silent, save for the sound of Hunter's boots dragging through the slush and his ragged, hysterical breathing. He was no longer the arrogant prince of Oakhaven High. He was a broken child, shivering under the weight of a reality he couldn't manipulate with his father's checkbook. I kept one hand on his shoulder, not to guide him, but to remind him that I was still there. Every time he stumbled, I felt the tremors of his fear through my palm. By the time we reached the trailhead, the local authorities were waiting. Not the corrupt deputies under Sergeant Kyle's thumb, but the state troopers and a federal agent Victor had coordinated with. The blue and red lights cut through the fog like a neon scythe. "Logan," one of the troopers shouted, his hand resting on his holster. "Step back from the boy." I stopped. I didn't raise my hands in a panic. I slowly released Hunter's collar and stepped away, letting the boy collapse into the arms of the officers. He didn't look back at me. He just buried his face in his hands. weeping as they clicked the cuffs onto his wrists. It was a small sound, the ratcheting of metal on bone, but it was the sound of the world finally righting itself. "He's all yours," I told the lead trooper. "He has a lot to say about a certain alleyway and a certain sergeant who helped him hide the truth." I didn't wait to give a formal statement. I climbed back into my truck and drove straight to the hospital. My mind was a tactical loop. Hunter was in custody, Victor was being processed by the feds, and the corruption in Oakhaven was being burned out at the root. But the mission wasn't a success until my son walked out of that building. When I reached the ICU, the atmosphere had shifted. The frantic energy of the crash had been replaced by a heavy, clinical stillness. Lila was standing by the window, her silhouette framed by the rising sun. She looked up as I entered, her eyes red but no longer leaking tears. "He's out of surgery," she whispered. "The doctor said the pressure on his brain has stabilized. He's breathing on his own, Logan." I felt the air leave my lungs in a rush. I sank into the chair next to Mason's bed and put my head in my hands. The instructor finally retreated, leaving only the father behind. The calloused, lethal part of me that had spent the last 72 hours hunting shadows finally began to go dormant. "I saw the news," Lila said softly, sitting on the edge of the bed. "The chief of police was arrested an hour ago. And the councilman, they're saying he's involved in some kind of massive racketeering case." "How did you do it?" "I didn't," I said, looking at Mason's pale face. "The truth did it. I just made sure it didn't get buried." The next few hours were a blur of doctors and paperwork. But as the afternoon sun hit the hospital room floor, Mason's hand moved again. This time, it wasn't a reflex. His eyes fluttered open, squinting against the light. "Dad?" His voice was a dry, raspy ghost of itself. I leaned forward, my heart hammering. "I'm here, Mason. I'm right here." He looked at me, then at the bandages on his arms, then back at me. A flash of memory seemed to cross his face, the alleyway, the laughter, the pain. His eyes filled with a sudden, sharp fear. "Hunter," he said. "Hunter is gone, son," I said, my voice firm and steady. "He's never going to touch you again. Not him, not his friends, not his father. It's over." Mason closed his eyes, a single tear tracking through the bruising on his cheek. I thought nobody saw. "I saw," I whispered, "and I made sure everyone else saw, too." He drifted back into a natural sleep, not a coma, just a deep, healing rest. I stood up and walked to the door, where Blake and Grant were waiting in the hallway. They looked like ordinary men now, their tactical gear replaced by casual jackets, but their eyes were still sharp. "The cleanup is almost finished, boss," Blake said. "Victor has the data from the sergeant's home computer. It turns out Kyle was keeping a black book of every bribe he took. He was planning on blackmailing the councilman himself one day. The feds are having a field day with it." "And the other boys?" I asked. "Julian's statement opened the floodgates," Grant added. "Colin and the others are being picked up as we speak. No bail. The judge is the one Victor tried to have replaced last year. She's not in a forgiving mood." I nodded. The tactical extraction of the wolf pack from the community was complete. We had removed the cancer without killing the patient. "Go home, guys," I said, shaking their hands. "I'll handle the rest." "What's the rest, Logan?" Grant asked. I looked back through the glass at my son. "The rest is being a father, and making sure that when he wakes up, he doesn't just feel safe. He feels proud." I watched my team walk away, disappearing into the normal, everyday crowd of the hospital. They were ghosts again, and soon I would be too. But as I turned back to the room, I noticed a man standing at the end of the hall. It was Sergeant Kyle. He wasn't in uniform. He was in handcuffs, being led toward the elevator by two grim-faced state troopers. He saw me. For a second, the old arrogance flared in his eyes, a look that said he'd find a way out of this. I didn't say a word. I just raised my hand and pointed to the camera in the corner of the ceiling. The color drained from his face. He remembered the message on his dashboard, The instructor is watching. He looked down at his feet as the elevator doors closed. He was no longer a hunter. He was just another target that had been neutralized by a man who knew exactly where to strike. I walked back into Mason's room and pulled the chair closer to his bed. I had spent my life teaching men how to survive the worst the world had to offer. Now, I was going to spend my life making sure my son lived in the best of it. 3 days after Hunter's arrest, Oak Haven turned into a war zone of headlines. The morning news was a parade of suits being let out in cuffs, city officials, officers, board members. The illusion of control shattered overnight. For the first time in years, the town wasn't afraid of those men anymore. They were afraid of the truth. But I wasn't celebrating. The body may have healed, the evidence may have spread, but deep down I knew the storm wasn't over. Not until I faced the roots of it myself. Late that night, I got a call from Blake. His tone was off. "Boss, we've got movement." Hunter was being transferred from county lockup to federal holding. The transport got hit 30 minutes ago. I froze. Say that again. 2 black SUVs intercepted it outside Route 19. Driver's dead, escort gone. They took the kid. I was already grabbing my jacket. "Who authorized the route?" "Not us," Blake replied. "But you'll want to see this." The license plates trace back to a company owned by Councilman Victor's father. The old man's pulling strings. He wants his grandson erased before he talks. So that was it, the final act. The cleanup attempt. Victor's father wasn't going to let his dynasty die quietly. He'd rather silence blood than admit guilt. "Send me the coordinates," I said. The chase ended at an abandoned concrete plant on the outskirts of town, a graveyard of steel beams and forgotten labor. Rain hammered against the cracked roofs, turning the whole place into a dripping maze of shadows. I moved fast, every instinct lit like a fuse. Inside, the echo of men's voices bounced through the corridors, 2 bodyguards, a driver, and the old man himself. And then I heard another voice. Hunter's. Panicked, pleading, but alive. "You can't do this, Grandpa. You can't. Shut up before I finish what your stupidity started," the old man spat. I crept closer. They were near the loading pit, an open square of black water where runoff gathered. One bodyguard had a pistol pressed against Hunter's back. The old man lit a cigar, unfazed by the thunder. He looked like every corrupt old politician I'd ever dismantled overseas. Composed, cruel, convinced he was untouchable. "Your father was reckless," he said to Hunter. "But he knew how to clean up his own messes. You, however, you're sloppy. You've endangered everything we built." Hunter was shaking, hands bound, rain plastering his hair to his forehead. "I didn't mean to, I swear. You humiliated this family on national television," the old man roared. "Death is mercy compared to what you've done." I stepped out from behind the pillar. "Then I guess mercy's not your specialty." The bodyguards turned first, guns snapping up. I was already moving, 1 clean pivot, 2 steps forward. My shoulder slammed into the first guard's ribs with a crack, disarming him before his finger could tighten. The second reached for his holster. I swept his leg, twisted his wrist, and pinned his head to the cold concrete. Less than 4 seconds. 2 neutralized. The old man staggered back, pointing his pistol at me with a trembling hand. His voice broke. "You don't understand what you're doing, Logan. You destroy me, you destroy this city. Everything runs through me. You mistook control for creation," I said. My tone was calm, surgical. "You didn't build this city. You infected it. You think you're any better?" he shouted, his voice unraveling. "You're a killer. You train killers. Men like you create violence and then act shocked when it's staring back at you." For a moment, the words landed like a bullet. He wasn't wrong. I had spent decades teaching men to become efficient, untraceable ghosts. Maybe some part of that knowledge had trickled into this place, filtered down through money and power, until it landed in the fists of boys like Hunter. But the difference was simple. I had taught men to fight for something. This family fought against anything that reminded them they could lose. Hunter was still shaking on his knees, staring at me like I was both salvation and damnation. I didn't. I didn't want this, he gasped. I took a slow step forward. You thought pain was entertainment. Now you see what real pain looks like. It doesn't scream, it endures. The old man's finger twitched on the trigger. I didn't flinch. Go ahead, I said quietly. Shoot. But the moment you do, those files go public, not the filtered ones. The full ones. Every offshore account, every hidden name you bribed. The girl you paid off after your son's car accident. The missing scholarship funds. Everything. Because, unlike you, I always have an exit plan. His face went white. The gun wavered, then dropped, hitting the floor with a hollow clatter. You think this ends here? He murmured. No, I said. It ends everywhere your influence touches. Sirens began to scream in the distance. State Patrol. Blake's timing was perfect. I turned to leave. As I passed Hunter, I stopped just long enough to say, you get one chance to become better than the men who raised you. If you waste it, the next time you see me, I won't be here to talk. Outside, the rain eased into a fine mist. I could see the flash of blue and white lights through the skeletal ribs of the factory. I didn't wait to be thanked. The feds would handle the cleanup. My mission was over. Driving back toward the city, the fog began to lift over the water towers. For the first time in days, the world felt still. When I walked into the hospital, Mason was awake, weak, but upright, watching the sun rise through the window. He turned when he saw me. You look tired. Been a long week, I said with a faint smile. Lila was asleep in the chair beside him. Mason's voice was soft when he spoke again. Did you do it? Did they get what they deserved? I sat on the edge of the bed, meeting his tired eyes. Justice isn't always about punishment, son. Sometimes, it's about teaching people what fear feels like when they think they're untouchable. He nodded slowly, and for the first time since the attack, his expression softened. Then I guess you taught them. I looked out the window as the sunlight broke through the rain. Yeah, I murmured. Lesson learned. 2 months passed, yet Oak Haven still buzzed like a power line struck by a storm. The once untouchable names that had ruled this town now scrolled across every national headline. Arrests, trials, resignations. Councilman Victor's dynasty was finished, dismantled not by politics, but by truth. Sergeant Kyle's trial became the symbol of everything rotten in that small-town system. His recorded conversations, his deleted evidence, his smirks captured on video, all of it played in a courtroom full of reporters. And there, in the witness box, sat Julian, trembling but honest. Hunter testified last. He didn't plead innocence. He didn't look to his lawyers. He just said, I hurt someone who didn't deserve it. Because I thought no one could touch me. But someone did. Then he looked at me. Only for a second. But I saw it. The first genuine regret of his life. The judge sentenced him to 8 years. Light maybe, but I didn't flinch. The real sentence was already inside his head. Fear, guilt, memory. Those don't have an expiration date. By the time the verdict came down, the hospital halls no longer smelled like pain. Mason was home now. His steps were slow, careful, but strong. Sometimes, I'd catch him looking out the window the same way I did, as if he was scanning for ghosts in the distance. That night, the three of us, me, Lila, Mason, sat on the porch. The crickets were loud, the air still heavy with the scent of wet earth. Mason's voice had that old spark again when he broke the silence. Dad, you could have walked away. Let the police handle it. I could have, I said quietly. But sometimes walking away is how evil learns to walk free. And I couldn't teach you that kind of world. Lila reached over, placing her hand on mine. Her eyes held the same guilt, but softer now, like the sharp edges had finally dulled. You didn't just protect him, Logan, she said. You changed this place. I didn't answer. Maybe she was right. Maybe I just did what I always did. Identify the threat, eliminate the risk, safeguard the innocent. But as I looked at Mason's steady gaze in the fading light, I realized something else. For all the years I trained soldiers to fight wars, This was the first time I'd actually won one. And it wasn't with weapons or tactics. It was by standing for the one thing the world rarely protects anymore: decency. Mason turned toward me, his voice quiet. "Are you done fighting now?" I breathed in the cool night air and gave a faint smile. "Maybe, just maybe, I'm finally ready to live instead." He smiled back. The porch light flickered, fireflies drifted in the trees, and for the first time since that brutal evening behind the school, peace finally found its way home. But before I went back inside, I couldn't help but glance toward the distant hills where the old concrete plant once stood. Silence. Empty. Except for the echo of a life rebuilt. And now, I leave one question to you. The one still watching, listening, and feeling every beat of this story. Would you have done the same? For your child? For justice? For peace? Tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from, and what kind of stories touch you the most. Family revenge, emotional betrayal, quiet justice, or redemption tales. I want to bring you stories that you feel deep in your chest. If this story made your heart race, or maybe made your eyes sting just a bit, don't forget, drop a like, subscribe politely, and stay with us. More thrilling, raw, and unforgettable human stories are on the way. Till our next epic and emotional revenge story. Take care of yourselves, and remember, the quietest battles are often fought inside us.